Can we please call the meeting to order? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Rigby?
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis?
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva?
Yes.
Mr. Valentine?
Yes.
Mr. Mellon?
Yes. Okay, can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? And Mr. Hodges, would you lead us?
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. All right, first up, we need to appoint, we need a motion to appoint Tyson Hodges as President Pro Tem for this special board meeting. Appointment to, this board meeting only, appointment to terminate automatically upon close of the meeting. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, please call the roll.
All right. Mr. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva?
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby?
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis?
Yes.
Mr. Mellon?
Yes, motion passes 5-0. We have a recommendation to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, please call the roll.
All right. Mr. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby?
Yes. Yes.
Mrs. De Silva?
Yes.
Mr. Mellon?
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Okay, now for executive session, there's a recommendation in accordance with the Ohio Revised Code 121.22G. The Dublin Board of Education will go into executive session to consider to consider disputes involving the public body that are subject to pending or imminent court action. Do we have a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, please call the roll.
Mr. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis?
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva?
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby?
Yes.
Mr. Mellon?
Yes, motion passes 5-0. The board will convene into executive session. Upon coming out of executive session, we will reconvene in this location. Thank you. All right, so we will reconvene coming out of executive session, and I will turn it over to Dr. Marshausen for a board update.
As the Board of Education prepares to have a deliberation about where we are with our current COVID cases, I'd just like to present some data. Much of this are things that the 5 of you have independently asked me for over the past several days. So as we go through this, all of this will be available to the public. This will be posted tomorrow. So the data points, I know sometimes people take screenshots. All of this data will be available to anyone interested as we move forward. Just to kind of reflect where we are right now. And my concern as the superintendent is we've been having an awful lot of angst and anxiety over what largely has been a conversation about our high schools. K-8, masks are required during the school day. In grades K-8, parents have an exemption process if they would like to exempt their child from the mask mandate. That exemption process is still open and remains open if parents would like to exempt their child for the mask mandate. In grades 9 through 12, we've been masks strongly recommended or masks encouraged. And I would like to thank all of our high school staff and students and teachers, because when asked over the last 2 weeks by myself and Mr. Melody and Mr. Valentine, we have had high mask wearing in our high schools on a voluntary basis from our high school students. So thank you to our students who have listened and when asked, worn masks. So that's our current situation. In terms of notifications, and we clarified this directly with the Ohio Department of Health today, there are only 2 requirements under the current health order that's still in place for the school to notify parents. Number 1, we must notify parents if there is a case in their child's building. We have been doing this with an email home, and if you're a parent in the district, you get an email from your child's school when there's a positive case in the building. We will be shifting this in the next week or so to the website, and the dashboard will be updated daily. So parents will no longer get the daily email when there's a case in the building. They can go check and, if so interested, look at the case counts every day as they appear in their buildings. The other notification is you must be notified if there's a case in your child's class. So we will continue, and we are currently doing what is required under Ohio Revised Code when it comes to notifications. We are not required to be contact tracing. In fact, there are lots of discussions about contact tracing from various counties, from the Ohio Department of Health, and with the numbers where they are, one of the reasons that we proposed some changes last week was just because our nurses could not keep up with the contact tracing. So not a requirement. These are the 2 requirements under Ohio Revised Code. Our goals as administration to share with the public, and Mr. Valentine asked me the question on Saturday, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? And why were there changes? Number 1, last week, we want to keep our schools open. We want our students and our staff and our teachers healthy so that we can keep our schools open. We believe, and we will do everything we can to welcome our students into our schools every day. So that was our first goal when we look at this spike and what we're dealing with. We want to be able to keep a place for our kids to come to school every day. Number 2, any strategies we put in place, we want them to be least disruptive to the classroom learning environment. We want to keep the classroom learning environment as normal and as safe and as healthy as possible so our teachers can teach. Number 3, support for our nurses. Our nurses have been heroes during this entire process. Their jobs were not easy pre-COVID. we're pushing them to the limits before COVID, and now with everything going on. And if you think about what I just said, even about notifications, today they got all the notifications from Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Now you're going and you're looking at the letters, you're looking at who gets notified, and those don't even require letters because they weren't positive in your kid's class. Now starting tomorrow, anyone who tested positive today, you got to go through schedules, you got to send letters. Our nurses and our teachers have been amazing during this, so we need to look at how we make that manageable. And then finally, there's a continued focus on mental health and support of our kids who are going through trauma as a result of COVID. It wasn't easy before. Our students were struggling with mental health issues pre-COVID. They've been exacerbated by COVID. So we need to keep in mind that's one of our ongoing conversations. And what can we do as the adults to relieve the stress and trauma in our children's lives so that we can work on raising healthy and happy kids? So keep schools open. When we look at our absentee data, and this is all classifications, classified and certified staff, in 2019, in the second week of January, we were between 7.7 and 11.2% absent of teachers and custodians and secretaries every day. In 2020, that was 7.6 to 10%. This year, it's 11 to 13.3%. Those percentages aren't vastly different. What's vastly different is our fill rate. The amount of substitutes available in school districts has decreased significantly since 2019. We've been saying this before there was COVID. We don't have enough subs. And we can go into the litany of reasons why we don't have enough subs. When you make teachers stay till they're 60, they're much less likely to want to come back to school than when they retired at 52. You know, there are all these different things. But so one of our concerns with keeping schools open is our sub rate. When we look at what our substitute fill rates have been historically, we had been 94%, 93%, 94%, meaning if someone was absent, we had a sub for that space. We've never been at 100% every day. This school year, we were 72% in September. It was bad. And as a board, you gave us permission to raise our substitute rates. You gave us permission to hire more permanent subs. And we now have a cadre of permanent subs who only sub in Dublin. And we got our fill rates back up into the low 80s. Our teachers feel that. That's good when we were able to get those fill rates back up. The last couple weeks, we've been at 76 as our average fill rate. Today, we were back in the low 80s. Tomorrow, right around 80%. We talk every day. And when we don't have the substitutes in our classrooms, it means we've got high school teachers not having their planned periods covering other plans. It means we don't have some of the support services. It means we're shuffling people around to make sure that there is a caring adult in front of our classes so our kids can come to school. We're pretty confident that we're in a solid place to be able to keep our schools open. Our bus drivers, as we celebrated last meeting, have been heroes. We're proud that today we were able to operate all of our buildings on normal schedule. We have Plan B if we have to delay a couple buildings so that we can get our buses and our kids to school. And Mr. Stark and our transportation team have been great. So when you look at the goal of keeping our doors open, we've been able to make the adjustments to keep our doors open. When we look at COVID in Central Ohio, COVID is high in Dublin. Period. End of story. We have high rates in Dublin. We're talking about numbers that if we had looked at them 12 months ago, we would have said there's no way we'd be at 2,900 per 100,000. It's where we are as a community right now. We're also highly vaccinated. 85% of the residents in the school district are vaccinated. And I'll share in a little bit the numbers in our schools. We have high vaccination rates. The behavior in the community mirrors what our numbers look like in the schools. And I don't know any place that has really high community spread that doesn't have really high case counts in their schools. We don't live in a bubble, and it's not being able to isolate one or the other. Public behavior is what public behavior is. When you look at our cases in the district, and these are our kiddos, when we came back from winter break, we had several days where we were near or above 300 individual cases per day. When you look at where we were last week, we were back into the 200s. Today we were in the 200s. When we look at the pattern, we know that Monday or the first day back are always higher. Today our nurses were entering Saturday, Sunday, and Monday cases. When the kids aren't with us, they're not staying in their basements. They're not staying at home. Our nurses will tell us the stories of the sleepover at the elementary that caused 5 cases from this weekend. True story, know where it happened. The kids are out, they're doing their things. It's just part of what they are. And that's just, those cases count in here. And my point for saying this is it's not just a school issue. This is what we're all doing. When you look at the percentage of our cases that are school aged, and I think this is really important, about 20% in any community of the people in that community are of school age. So when you look at the proportion of cases in a certain age group to the proportion of school, you really would, if you're not out of whack, you're around 20%. We've been around that 20% mark since before Christmas. We are not out of proportion. And when I look at this, I think it's not a school thing, it's an everything thing. And when you look at other districts, you look at Worthington, you look at Westerville, you look at Hilliard, you look at Upper Arlington, who have different mitigation strategies, we all have about the same proportion of our kids who are COVID positive. There doesn't seem to be a huge difference between the school mitigation practices and what's happening with COVID in the community. It's even more evident when we look at this chart. When you look at Dublin, Worthington, Westerville, New Albany, Hilliard, Upper Arlington, Columbus, and Gahanna, and you look at the COVID spread and the slope of the curve when you're looking at cases per 100,000, they're all almost identical. And several of these districts have mask mandates. Several of these districts don't have mask mandates. It doesn't appear when looking at this data that there is a lot of difference between the mitigation strategies and the spread. COVID cases in Dublin are high. COVID cases in our schools are high. When you look at the N rate, the reproduction rate across Franklin County, we are seeing a decline in COVID spread since the first part of January. All of these charts are from yesterday, but when I look at this chart was updated today, it's on the similar slope. So we are starting to see positive data. The Hospital Association in Ohio shared data yesterday that the last 7 days have seen decreases in hospitalizations in Ohio. Things are there, but we're starting to see some positive signs. We were also asked about absenteeism of our students, and we're comparing absenteeism here over the last 4 years. Yes, the numbers are higher this year. When you look across the board in almost every, if not in every case, we have higher absenteeism this January than we've had in previous Januaries and previous Decembers. yeah, COVID cases are high. We're going to have higher absenteeism. I've often been asked, what's the threshold in which you would close a school or close a building? And I've had experience with this in districts with influenza. You get between 15 and 20% of a student population that may be absent, and you start having conversations with your health department. And it's in that 15 to 20% range. You look at trends, you look at, is it going up or down? Where are you? So there is a point at which we would say this school has an individual problem. In my time in Hilliard, we had those conversations about one of the schools. You make a decision based on the best information you can have. When we look at our middle schools, you look at the rates here in the different buildings, they're all in about the same ballpark, and we're not getting to that 15% rate. When we look at our high schools, we do have one of our high schools that in January, we start to get near that 15% absenteeism. If that number continues to climb over the next week or two, or the next several days, you have conversations with the health department. They have experience in this. Where we are right now, we've got to keep an eye on where Scioto High School is. Just something that we know, just from looking at the data. When we look at the positive cases that were on our dashboard last Thursday, at the elementary, 2.9% of our students were COVID positive. At the middle school, 4.5% of our students were COVID positive, and at the high school, 3.9%. And I share this number to say we have mask mandates at the elementary and the middle school. We've asked students to wear masks at the high school. It doesn't appear that there's a statistically significant difference in what we're doing. Now, I would say most of our high school kids have chosen to wear masks at school. That's awesome. They volunteered to do that. When we look at our vaccination rates, 80% of our high school students have at least one shot. 77% of our high school students have 2 or more shots. 66% of our middle school students have 2 or more shots. Only 49% of our elementary students have at least 2 shots. 59 have at least 1 and started the process. We also continue to offer in-school vaccination clinics through the month of January and into February in all of our elementary schools. We also have a series of booster clinics and follow-up clinics scheduled in February at our 3 high schools and our 5 middle schools. So by the end of February, we'll have provided another opportunity at every grade level if parents choose for their children to be vaccinated.
I point this out every time we talk about this, but just to hammer this home about who is providing the shots and the process that takes place where it is not our staff that is actually doing this.
Thank you, Mr. Valentine. All of our vaccine clinics are operated by pharmacies and medical providers. In the in-school clinics, parents have to fill out the forms online. We know who the kids are, so we ensure that the right students are getting to the clinics themselves. We are not, and our nurses are not, doing any of the vaccinations. They're external providers that we partner with that we bring into our schools to do that.
Thank you, and I just want to add on to that because there's been a little bit of chatter about the potential for teachers to help students go down without parental consent or knowledge, and just I know it's not happening, and I think just for the record to put that out there that our teachers aren't doing that, and more than ever their focus is on the educational side of this, and there's more than enough to deal with on that end. I know the past week has been tough. For that matter, the past 2 years has been tough, but the past week has been tough for them in the position that they've been in. And so just for the sake of clarity of making sure the public knows this, teachers are not going to just on their own take children down to the clinics.
Yes, sir. And one of the things that's wonderful about Dublin is our neighborhood elementaries. We know who our kids are. There's no way that we're taking a kid to a vaccine clinic to get a vaccination without all of the safety and protocols in place. When we look since January 10th, and this data was updated today, we've had 972 positive cases in the Dublin City School District. When we trace those cases, we can confirm that 3.5% of those cases have come from school. 14 or 1.5% of those cases have come from sports. We can confirm that 523 of those cases, over 50%, we confirm are outside of school. And then there are 401 that we don't know, that we're unable to determine where that student acquired the virus. Since December of 21, and we've stopped following this in the past couple days, but since December 1st of 2021, we had 1,300 students in modified quarantine. Only 9 of them flipped in school, and 4 of them flipped in sports. So less than 1% of the students who had been in modified quarantine ended up being positive. Now, Omicron has changed this, but as we've stopped the contact tracing to the same level, we've stopped putting kids in more modified quarantine in the same way. Considerations for the board as we will open this up to discussion, because I've talked enough. Number one, Dublin has high community case counts at the community level, and the community has very diverse behavioral response to COVID. How individual families choose to behave and what they choose to do in our community is up to the individual families. And we have high case counts. It's just what it is. Dublin has a high vaccination rate among all age groups. And the city schools continues to offer in-school and weekend vaccination clinics. We post the information from Ohio Health, as they are a strong partner in our community and also are offering vaccination clinics. Dublin's proportion of school-age cases is similar to other districts regardless of mitigation strategies. There does not seem to be a significant difference in grade level positivity rates within the school district based on our mitigation strategies at various grade levels. And the other thing is, and this isn't science, well, as a fact, we have had a consistent supply of tests within the school district. We have another shipment of tests coming in from the Ohio Department of Health this week. And in many of our cases, when our nurses have sent a child home with sniffles, with a runny nose, with symptoms, we've said they can't come back until they test. I have no information about what other districts are doing with tests. I hear in the news and anecdotally that tests are in short supply. They aren't in short supply in Dublin. I don't know if our case count is higher because we are testing a lot. And I don't know what other districts are doing with their case counts. I can't speak to that. But I can speak to the fact that our nurses have done a phenomenal job making sure that when a kid goes home with symptoms, there's often a test in the bag. When families come and want tests, and at one point we were giving them to families, but when parents come and say, I'd like to get my kid an antigen test, we've got the Buy Next Now tests available to families. And we'll continue to be able to do that. We've been able to, if there is a case on a team, to test entire teams. We can continue to be able to do that. So I am confident that anyone in our community who is interested in any of our getting their children tested, that's something that we've been able to do and haven't been forced to rely on external supplies of COVID tests. And now I will open it up to the board for conversation.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Marshausen, for the update. And as you said, we'll open it up for discussion amongst the members.
right,
Anyone?
I'll jump in. At our last meeting, we had 3 different possible avenues to go down, and obviously went down number 2, right into issues related to it. And now we find ourselves essentially in a spot where we are similar to what we were doing prior to Christmas break. All things considered, there's some nuances in there, especially for the teachers. But now, as we look at our path moving forward, we can, from where I sit, we can return to what we were doing with some possible revisions, or we would be looking at a mandate and then getting into the discussion again of exemptions or not having exemptions, which is a whole nother discussion in and of itself. At this stage, Dr. Marshausen, I'd like to hear from you on what you think would be the best possible path for us moving forward in a way that allows us to achieve the goals that you mentioned up on the screen, as well as a path that is hopefully going to not put us in a position where we are continuing to review this on a nonstop basis.
Mr. Valentine, if I could have a redo from last Monday's recommendations, one of the things that I wouldn't have done is I wouldn't have touched pre-K-8. I wouldn't have touched the mask exemptions. I wouldn't have gone to the pre-K-8. It was working really well. The parents who wanted their exemptions had the opportunity to have their exemptions. We were at and are still at someplace between 6 and 7%, I believe, with our mask exemptions. It does permit and understand parent choice as part of that process in that grade level. The problem we were looking at were high schools and nurses. So if I could do it all again, and I do apologize for creating confusion by trying to solve more of a problem than maybe we needed to solve. It was a high school issue and it was a nursing issue. So if I could do it again, I would say K-8, honor the exemptions until such a time that we're able to finish those vaccination clinics. When we're able to get through all the clinics and as vaccination rates are available, then you make that mask optional at a certain point. At our high schools, I think by asking our students in the letter that Mr. Melody and yourself and I signed got to where I think we got as many kids wearing masks as we would if we had put in a mandate and then had exemptions at the high schools. I think if we put a mandate on our high schools and permit the mask exemptions, we're going to get 20% of our high school kids or more on mask exemptions. And I think there is a operational challenge with that. Being able to identify students who have mask exemptions and don't have mask exemptions, and what kid filled out the exemption form themselves, and how do mom and dad know. And if we can get to the same place by saying, and with the help of our high school administrations saying, you know, you did this for 2 weeks, we're going to ask you for the rest of January to continue wearing masks at the high school, but not make it mandatory. That's where I would go. If the board chooses to say, policy says you get to make the decisions, and I was cleaning this up, I would go back at the elementary, I would go back to voluntary at the high school. We would send the letters that we have to under Ohio law. We would put a date at the high school end of January. We would put a date at the elementary when the couple weeks past the vaccinations, and we would go. And I think that would get us to where we need to be. As I said, we've got, obviously our children's safety is a major concern for us. We've got to get off this narrative and get back to the issues that are going to be critical to us in the next several months. Yeah, and that we got to get onto that cycle. So that's what I would do.
Just to piggyback off the scenarios and talking about a mandate, and a mandate that would not have exemptions from so if let's say that we tonight walked away from here, there was a mandate in place and there weren't exemptions. I think it's important for the community to understand the logistical component of enforcing that and what it looks like when students are not willing to wear masks, and what we then also have to do in that sort of scenario.
Well, I think first of all, we put kids in a really bad position. I think this week we put some kids in a really bad position. Mom and dad say one thing, kids, we create conflict for our children. If kids are dropped off or brought to school and they refuse to wear a mask, and we have a mask mandate, we will have to create places for those students to be in school. Meaning, if you have 35 kids at Wyandotte Elementary who show up without masks, and mom and dad won't come pick them up, then you're probably turning the library into a place for the unmasked students to be, and then libraries on a cart. If you're at a high school, what does it look like with the unmasked students? You know, we're not physically kicking them out. We're not physically removing them. So you would probably look at a place that you would have unmasked students go while they were in your building. And then you're looking at a process by which you're communicating with parents. Is it discipline? Is it not discipline? According to policy, it's a dress code, but I don't think that's where any of us are. I don't think any of us would want children suspended, but now you're isolating in a way that if that's the way the Board of Education chooses, our administrative team will do everything in our power to enforce the direction of the Board of Education. From a logistic standpoint, I can assure you that that's not the direction that our building principals or our district leadership team wants to go.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Marshausen. I think that when, last week was a difficult week, so I would just like to really recognize our teachers and our principals and everybody that kind of held strong through last week. It was a learning experience, I think, for all of us. I think that what became widely apparent is we're not going to change what people do in their free time by masking kids in school. It's just not going to happen. So by adding a mask mandate to our high schools, by looking at everything, every data, every point that I've had access to, we're not changing anything. We're dragging on a mental health crisis. And we need a sustainable approach forward that works for our children. We're not going to fight COVID overnight, unfortunately. I wish there was a magic wand that I could wave that this was gone. But I think that we are in a place where I care about safety, but I think safety means more than a mask. It's more than a vaccine. We have to be looking at the whole child. And I think last week helped us get to that place. So thank you, teachers and parents and principals and our entire community for bearing with last week as we try to forge ahead into we're seeing the whole student.
I have a question about, it kind of goes along with the contact tracing. I guess first, could you explain just to everyone about the changes that we're having as it relates to contact tracing, just so everyone understands how the process has changed and what's going to happen going forward?
Right now, if your child is in a classroom with someone who is COVID positive, you will receive a letter. You will receive the health department guidance with what you should do. And our biggest request of moms and dads is if you're notified that your child has been in the classroom with someone who's COVID positive, we need you to monitor the symptoms, and if they display symptoms, you need to keep them home. And you need to make sure, and we ask you to check every day. We also ask you to be responsive if we see symptoms in your child, that you come pick them up, and if we send them home with you with a test, that you administer the test. That's where right now we will be when it comes to contact tracing.
And along those lines, can you also talk about what will happen if a student tests positive?
One of the conversations that Mr. Andrus and I had with Franklin County Public Health Commissioner Mazzola on Friday was we do need to enforce that if a student tests positive, if they return to school after 5 days, they need to wear a mask for those 5 days after they return. And that would be irrespective of a mask exemption. And that's something that we will have to enforce because the getting back to 5 days is important for the student's mental health. We don't want kids out for 2 weeks, but there is a chance that that student would still be shedding in days 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So we will be enforcing with the help of Franklin County Public Health that if your child is a positive COVID student, they can come back to school on day 6, but they're going to need to wear a mask whether they have an exemption or not. And I think that's fair, and I think that's something that we will be able to manage.
Dr. Marshausen, in the K through 8, in the arrangement we have now, students are required to wear masks, but we do have exemptions in place. What is your thought going forward if a family chooses to file an exemption today? And will that be honored? That's the first question. And then is there an endpoint that you see with this mask requirement for K through 8? And if so, what would that be and what is that based on?
The exemption process and the application has been online the entire year. We've had parents continue to fill that out, and I don't anticipate that changing. That exemption policy is grounded, that exemption process is grounded in board policy, and it's based on your policy. So that will not be unilaterally taken away. In regards to an end date, when we look at the last vaccination clinics, they would be our booster clinics in our middle schools at the end of February. We would want several weeks after those last booster clinics are complete so that the efficacy of the vaccine could reach its full potential. So we'd probably be looking at the first week of March at when I think we would be comfortable making elementary mask recommended or mask optional at that point. And from everything that we hear and we hope, by then also Omicron will be a memory and will be back to more reasonable levels. It's getting warmer. All of those things kind of point to early March would be my recommendation.
I'm going to jump in with another vaccine clinic question / comment. I don't think it's our job to encourage necessarily, this is a personal view, to encourage folks to get vaccinated. I think it's our job to inform them. I think it's their just let me finish because I'm going somewhere with this. I think it's our job to inform them, provide opportunities as necessary, and I've supported everything that we've done here. One of the things as we take a look at the data that you had up there, some of our lowest vaccinated buildings, in particular as I look at the elementary level, are buildings that English is a second language. And I know that we do things with flu vaccine, and we have a great history and experience with reaching those communities where folks don't have English as a first language, and the barriers may be more difficult. I'm interested in, I don't know that this is a question that necessarily needs answered now, but at least disseminated out to us, how we're approaching those parents or those families to make sure that they understand the opportunities that they have.
I'm looking at Mr. Andres because if you don't mind, can he answer that question for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. Most of our communication is sent to parents in their native language, so they'll get it that way. We've also allowed Gift Health and Seaway International to host clinics at Chapman, at Wright, and there's going to be one at Old Sawmill in the coming weeks. Our bilingual aides also translate information to our parents to make sure that they get that information. So we continue to try to put things in their native language so they understand the opportunities if they would choose to
Thank you.
I would just like to follow that up with, while we're not forcing or encouraging, we're simply providing, and I think there needs to be a trust built back with our teachers that we actually trust them to not walk children down to a vaccine clinic when we as parents have not approved them to do so. Trust has to be given. And I don't know exactly where we go and earn that, but it's a problem. And it's saddening to hear that we truly have people in our community afraid that we're walking children down to vaccination clinics. And that says to me, we have a lot of trust to rebuild.
I actually have a follow-up with, just to follow up on what Mr. Valentine was saying. I think the differences in the vaccine rates aren't just at the elementary level. They're actually kind of across the board in the middle school and high school level. Is there opportunities for students at, say, Scioto who might need boosters? Is there opportunities for them to also go to one of these clinics?
The clinics that are held on the weekend.
Yeah, I'll jump in with a couple of comments here. First of all, we can all acknowledge it's been a long couple of weeks, actually a long couple of years for that matter. So we want to continue to thank the teachers and the parents for everything they've done. We're all sitting here tonight because we value education and we value children. And I think we can all agree that the best way to educate students is in person with no masks. Probably the second best way to educate students is in person with a mask. And the third option we have in our toolbox is virtual learning. And we all know that wasn't successful and met the needs of the child a couple years ago when we had to do that. So when we're looking at the infection rates throughout the district right now, a week ago when we sat here, there were 466 positive students at that time. Today, there are 677 positive students. So we still need to do more to continue to protect the community, protect the teachers, and be able to keep the doors open for in-person learning. And when we look at the tools we have in our toolbox to do that, are vaccinations, which we've talked about. We have high vaccination rates throughout the schools, and we are providing opportunities for vaccinations. Social distancing, we're doing that to the extent we can. It's not ideal. Some buildings it's easier than others. Lunchtime's difficult. Elementary classrooms are small, so we're doing the best we can to enforce social distancing. And the third one is to wear a mask. It stops the spread. It's something we can do to help. Come on, be respectful. We're talking here. It's a professional meeting. Let us have our comments. This is one of the tools that is recommended to help stop the spread. So we're asking for the community support to continue to help us stop the spread so we can keep the doors open. Because if we don't keep the doors open, in a couple of weeks, we'll have a discussion about, are we going remote? John kind of threw out decision points of 15 to 20%. We don't want to get there. We don't even want to talk about that. So we're just asking for continued support, continue to support the teachers, and help us keep the doors open to educate the children.
And to Mr. Melly, to piggyback off of what you're saying, the entire reason we went into last week because we wanted to keep our doors open, okay? So I was willing to try it. Remote learning is not something that I don't know that we have a huge percentage of our Dublin families that want to end up back in remote learning. So we are asking for continued support as we continue to have a virus that we don't really have control over because we want to keep our doors open. That's where we are. And respect for each other.
So are there any other questions for Dr. Marshausen or any comments from the board?
If there are none, at this time, I've prepared a resolution that I've distributed to the board members and Dr. Marshausen in hopes of memorializing the discussion this evening and the mitigation strategies that have been discussed amongst us. In this draft resolution, I'm open to comments, revisions, questions after I read it. I do think it's important as I bring this to the five of us that as we leave here tonight that there is not necessarily unanimous direction, but there's solid direction for our administrative team and our staff and more importantly our community. So if you will bear with me, I'm going to read through this. Whereas the Dublin City School District Board of Education has continued to consider the guidance from federal, state, and local health experts as it relates to COVID-19 and the safety and emotional well-being of students in school and has provided regular updates to the school district community regarding these matters. Whereas ensuring students have access to in-person learning is a key priority of the board, and the board remains committed to providing its students with that face-to-face classroom learning while maintaining appropriate student safety protocols and emotional supports. Whereas vaccination is a leading public health prevention strategy to end the COVID-19 pandemic, individuals age 5 and up are now eligible to receive vaccinations, and the district has made several free vaccination clinics available within the school buildings to the school district community to receive vaccination and boosters and intends to continue to do so. Whereas Ohio Revised Code Section 3313.67 authorizes boards of education to make and enforce such rules to prevent the spread of communicable diseases among students where the safety and interest of the public so requires. Now therefore, be it resolved that in order to prioritize student in-person learning and staff attendance as well as emotional well-being, the following mitigation and safety protocols shall continue and or implement effectively January 19th, 2022 and remain in place through March 7th, 2022 or as otherwise modified or extended by the board or the superintendent as authorized herein. And then I have a series of bullet points. Students in grades PK through 8, so preschool through 8th grade, are required to wear masks in school buildings during the instructional day through March 7th, 2022, subject to the exemptions set forth in the board policy. Exemption requests may be submitted at any time when masks are required. So underneath this resolution, exemptions would continue to stay in place, and we would continue to accept them moving forward, as Mrs. Rigby had previously asked to Dr. Marshausen. All passengers and drivers are required to wear masks while on school transportation, subject to the exclusions and exemptions in the CDC's January 29th, 2021 order. Again, that's a federal order. Universal mask wearing in grades 9 through 12 and at after-school events is strongly recommended but not required until January 31st in order to continue with in-person learning and to allow the district to continue to invite spectators to attend our non-instructional indoor activities during the winter months. Free at-home rapid test kits will be provided to individuals identified by the district for administration at home by the parent or guardian or employee as long as kits remain available. To the extent available, high-quality masks and respirators will be made available to staff, students, and visitors for use during the school day and at school events at no cost to the individual. The district will continue to work with community partners to provide on-site vaccination clinics for students, staff, and the school district community. Parents, guardians will continue to receive notifications of COVID cases as required by the Ohio Department of Health orders. Be it further resolved that the superintendent maintains the authority to implement further safety and mitigation protocols as he may determine are necessary, but shall not remove or limit the safety and mitigation protocols set forth in this resolution without the authority of the board. So we cannot, Dr. Marshausen is not in a position where he'd be able to peel back on this. Be it further resolved that no person shall be subject to discipline, harassment, or other mistreatment for choosing to voluntarily wear a mask or for not wearing a mask where such use is either not required or an exception applies. And lastly, be it further resolved that the board directs the superintendent to implement the actions set forth in this resolution to provide clear direction to district staff on appropriate implementation and to update the community regarding the same. And that concludes the resolution. Before I have a motion to move it to the floor, I throw it back to my fellow board members for any additional comments, questions, or suggestions on revisions.
I think Mr. Valentin did make a motion, so we do need a second on that motion, and then we can open it up for discussion.
Second.
Okay, the motion was made by Mr. Valentine, seconded by Ms. Rigsby. So are there questions or comments, revisions to the said motion?
Here in our discussion tonight, I think that this is a route that allows us to hopefully move together with what we were doing before Christmas break. I think that the March 7th date, while some of us may like to see that happen earlier, puts it on the calendar as where we aim to hopefully be in a position that we can adjust and change from where we currently are. I'm hopeful that this is our first time acting really and voting on something of this magnitude as a board. Last meeting we didn't vote on anything. I'm hoping that folks will take some serious consideration to this so that we can provide clear direction for the district and the community and be able to move forward.
Any additional comments or clarifications?
Just one. I'm just hopeful that, regardless of where we come out of this tonight, that we can have clear direction for students, for parents, for staff. So there is one uniform message that goes out for every building, because I think it's important, and not only for the discipline side of things, but also just to say that this is the path that we're going to try to go forward and be able to see our way out of this, where we are now, and get to a point where we can start talking about things that are important to our children, their education, their mental health, our growing district.
Okay. Any additional comments? Okay, I think the motion that was read outlines the discussion that we had tonight. I think it highlighted a few of the points that several of us made about direction and wishes for enforcement. So I think if there are no additional questions, I'd ask the treasurer to please call the roll.
Mr. Valentine,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
No.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
Mr. Melody.
Yes. Motion passes 4-0. 4-1, I'm sorry. 4-1. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye.